Now, with all that straightened out, let's now discuss the Philippines' engagement of and participation in various international organizations, starting with the United Nations. As you all know, the Philippines has been affiliated with the United Nations since the conception of the organization during World War II. The then Commonwealth of the Philippines was one of the signatories of the 1942 UN Declaration, from which the UN Charter of 1945 was based on. The Philippines was also among the 51 original member states and one of only 4 Asian nations that signed this charter, which marked the beginning of UN operations. Since its independence in 1946, the Philippines has been an active participant of the UN through various programs and commitments, some of which include the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015 and the Sustainable Development Goals that replaced it from 2016 onwards, the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families, and the Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs, among others. Instead of having its own standing army, the UN has a peacekeeping force, also known as Blue Helmets and Blue Berets, composed of military and police personnel contributed by member states. Indeed, peacekeeping is considered to be one of the most effective tools to assist countries in their transition from conflict to peace. There are 3 basic principles that continue to set UN peacekeeping operations apart as a tool for maintaining international peace and security. These 3 principles are interrelated and mutually reinforcing. First, consent of the parties. Second, you need impartiality. And third, there has to be non-use of force except in self-defense and defense of the mandate. Since the start of 2019, peacekeeping operations are the responsibility of the Department of Peace Operations, which took over the core functions and responsibilities of its predecessor agency, the Department for Peacekeeping Operations, now with a greater emphasis on cohesion, integrating different resources and knowledge, and promoting human rights. UN peacekeeping operations trace its roots to 1948 with the creation of the UN Military Observer Group for India and Pakistan, and the UN Truce Supervision Organization. There are currently 13 peacekeeping operations led by the Department of Peace Operations, the majority of which are in Africa. As of the end of August 2020, the Philippines is participating in 3 of these UN peacekeeping operations. First, in the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, also in the UN Mission in South Sudan, and finally in the UN Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan. The Philippines is regarded as one of the most active countries in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of peace support troop contribution, ranking 3rd among ASEAN member states after Indonesia and Malaysia, and 60th worldwide. However, the enactment of the 2013 policy on indefinite postponement of all deployments to mission areas with security threat level 3 and above resulted in a great decline in the succeeding Philippines troop deployment to UN missions, as you can see here on this slide. By 2014, the Philippines had contributed 37 police officers, 6 military experts, and 137 troops to the UN peacekeepers. Apart from troop contributions, many UN offices worldwide are also staffed by a large percentage of Filipinos. Another contribution of the Philippines that we can mention here is that the country is one of the co-founders of the Group of 77 Coalition. As you know, the G77 Coalition was founded in 1964 to promote collective economic interests among members of the UN. The G77 is the largest intergovernmental organization of developing countries in the UN, which provides the means for the countries of the South to articulate and promote their collective economic interests and enhance their joint negotiating capacity on all major international economic issues within the UN system, and promote South-South cooperation for development. Further, the Philippines has presided the UN Security Council as non-permanent member 7 times. First, in September and December 1957 under Carlos Romulo, in September 1963 under Jacinto Castel Borja, in July 1980 and September 1981 under Carlos Romulo, in June 2004 under Lauro Baja Jr. and Delia Domingo Albert, and in September 2005 under Lauro Baja Jr. and Bayani Mercado. Carlos P. Romulo is remembered in Philippine history for his remarkable UN participation as President, as mentioned earlier on, of the 4th session of the UN General Assembly in 1949 to 1950. Recently, however, there have been some concern in the UN about the state of human rights in the country. In 2016, President Rodrigo Duterte hit the UN for allegedly interfering in the affairs of the Philippines. During the 59th session of the International Covenant on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in September 2016, held in Geneva, Switzerland, the Philippines was due for its periodic review. In this review, some issues that the UN committee brought up included the war on drugs of the administration, overcrowding in Philippine prisons, and forced eviction of informal settlers. The following year, in 2017, the UN also urged the Philippines not to reinstate the death penalty, as it is in violation of the country's commitment under international law. In 2018, the Philippines took a leading role in advocating the adoption of the UN Global Compact for Migration. That December, we joined 163 countries in adopting the Marrakesh Compact, as it was eventually called, to set in place a voluntary international framework that will manage migration and provide decent treatment for millions of migrants worldwide. Apart from the commitments the Philippines has made in the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2016 Paris Agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, I would like to give you an idea of the kind of international commitments the Philippines has made in the area of peace and security. As a country that has embedded in its constitution an anti-war provision, the Philippines enthusiastically takes part in various international treaties that monitor the use and promotes the non-use of non-conventional weapons, including weapons of mass destruction. Primary to these international treaties is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or the NPT. The main objectives of the NPT are to further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament in general and complete disarmament, to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, and to promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. These three pillars, as they are informally referred to, are interrelated and mutually reinforcing. Opened for signature in 1968, the NPT entered into force in 1970. There are 93 signatory states, including the Philippines, which ratified the treaty in October 1972. The treaty is reviewed every 5 years in meetings called the Review Conferences of the parties to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The Philippines served as president of the review in May 2010. More countries are party to the NPT than any other arms limitation and disarmament agreement, a testament to the treaty's significance. As of August 2016, 191 states have become parties to the treaty. There have been some notable holdouts, however. North Korea, for example, acceded in 1985 but never came into compliance when it announced its withdrawal from the NPT in 2003 after detonating nuclear devices in violation of its core obligations. 4 UN member states have never accepted the NPT, 3 of which possess or are thought to possess nuclear weapons: India, Israel, and Pakistan. In addition, South Sudan, founded in 2011, has not joined. Our commitment to the non-use of non-conventional weapons goes beyond the NPT. As you can see here in this slide, we are also a participant to the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty, as most Southeast Asian countries are, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. The Philippines is also a state party to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, the first multilateral disarmament treaty banning the production of an entire category of weapons in 1972, and the Chemical Weapons Convention, which outlaws the production, stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons and their precursors. We have included elements of our commitment on non-conventional weapons into our Constitution, the National Security Policy, and the Strategic Trade Management Act. As for conventional weapons, the Philippines is also a party to the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which seeks to prohibit or restrict the use of certain conventional weapons that are considered excessively injurious or whose effects are indiscriminate, like landmines, booby traps, incendiary weapons, blinding laser weapons, and clearance of explosive remnants of war. The Arms Trade Treaty, which regulates the international trade in conventional weapons. The Convention on Cluster Munitions, which prohibits the use, transfer, and stockpiling of cluster bombs, a type of explosive weapon which scatters bomblets over an area, and the Ottawa Treaty, or the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. Like for non-conventional weapons, the Philippines has translated its international commitment to the banning or restriction of conventional weapons into our Constitution, policy, and domestic laws. Our involvement and participation in the UN is, of course, not a one-way street. In fact, the Philippines benefits tremendously from its membership in the United Nations. So I will devote this section to expound a little bit on this matter. Technical, financial, and other forms of assistance to the Philippines began in the late 1940s as the country recovered from the ravages of World War II. This partnership has progressed since then into a number of development initiatives, activities, and programs. And the establishment of the United Nations Development Program in 1965 further strengthened the UN's cooperation with the country. The UN country team in the Philippines is currently composed of 17 agencies, funds, and programs. The Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, and the International Monetary Fund are also members of the UN country team. Working as a team, the UN system develops the best strategy to respond to its host country's needs and plans. At any given time, the UN system in the Philippines, excluding the Asian Development Bank which the Philippines hosts, has an average of 1,000 international and national professional staff working on the many related issues of poverty reduction, gender, education, health, population management, human rights, governance, environment, labor issues, and peace and development. The UN country team is comprised of the UNDP and the following UN agencies, funds, and programs. In the 75 years that the Philippines has been a member of the United Nations, the specialized agencies of this international organization has always provided the Philippines with assistance in the event of calamities and helped the country raise funds for various causes. Let me take this opportunity to give examples of the assistance the Philippines has received recently. In food security, organizations such as the World Food Program and the Food and Agricultural Organization have intervened in the country's issues with regard to hunger and food shortage. According to the Social Weather Survey, approximately 3.4 million Filipino families experienced involuntary hunger during the latter part of 2016. The Global Food Security Index ranked the Philippines 72nd out of 109 countries. The WFP has provided nutritious meals for children aged 6 to 59 months, pregnant and nursing women, and livelihood programs for those affected by natural disasters and conflict. The WFP, in partnership with the government agency FNRI, or Food and Nutrition Research Institute, have developed specially enhanced local produce and micronutrient powder for better health of Filipino children. The FAO, on the other hand, focuses on the agricultural issues of the country. The FAO supports areas in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao, now the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, that are affected by conflict by rehabilitating local agriculture and fisheries-based livelihoods of more than 4 million farmers. In climate change and risk reduction, the UNDP, along with the Australian government, contributed 172 million pesos to the Resilience and Preparedness Towards Inclusiveness Development, or RAPID program for typhoon-affected areas. This presence is established in about 12 local government units in the Eastern Visayas area. In disaster response and recovery, in one of the country's most dire time of need, the UN, along with its network for humanitarian organizations, banded together in order to aid the country in the sectors of health, shelter, nutrition, and economic activity. According to the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the total funds donated reached about $469 million. In health, the UN Children's Emergency Fund, or UNICEF, has addressed the issue of infant and maternal mortality in the Philippines by allocating a number of birth attendant and maternal facilities to the country. Due to this, the number of health facilities in more rural areas as well as birthing centers has increased, especially in more remote areas such as Sarangani and Eastern Samar. Aside from this, the same organization also assists the efforts of the Department of Health when it comes to preventing diseases with vaccines, and especially high-risk areas in Mindanao, and the Cordillera region. In education, UNICEF also assists in the government's program that promotes a universal kindergarten called the Early Childhood Care and Development Program. The program is deployed in vulnerable areas that are subject to poverty, conflict, or natural disasters, such as Mountain Province, Masbate, Eastern Samar, North Cotabato, Sarangani, Davao, Maguindanao, and Manila. Other than kindergartens, UNICEF also has a hand in establishing more child-friendly models and practices to be followed by more than 5.3 thousand primary schools and 61 high schools, as well as contributions to education policies drafted by the Department of Education. Definitely worth mentioning is the benefit the Philippines has had in the field of peace and security. In January 2013, the Philippines filed an arbitration case against China at the United Nations-backed Arbitral Tribunal hosted by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague to settle the maritime dispute over the West Philippine Sea. The country asked the Arbitral Tribunal to uphold the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, which grants exclusive rights to explore and develop maritime features 200 nautical miles from its baselines. On the 12th of July 2016, the tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines. The tribunal also ruled that China has no historical rights based on the 9-line map. However, China has rejected this ruling. Despite Beijing's consistent attempts in the last 4 years to ignore or belittle the ruling, President Duterte used the General Assembly as a forum to raise the Philippines' legal victory against China, the first time he has done so in a UN forum. The award is now part of international law, beyond compromise and beyond the reach of passing governments to dilute, diminish, or abandon, declared President Duterte on the 23rd of September 2020. Finally, the Philippines also benefits from the United Nations Comprehensive Strategic Response to COVID-19. Based on the premise that no one is safe unless everyone is safe, the United Nations has initiated a large-scale, coordinated, and comprehensive health response, guided by the WHO and the Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan. This wide-ranging UN effort seeks to address the devastating socio-economic, humanitarian, and human rights aspects of the crisis. It is also a recovery process that promises to build back better and use the opportunity of this crisis to transition away from unsustainable systems and approaches. The UN response is funded through the following mechanisms that are undergoing various levels of fundraising: the WHO Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan, the Global Humanitarian Response Plan, and the UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. There is a need for an immediate relief package for developing countries. COVID-19 has highlighted the unsustainability of the existing development pathway, exacerbating existing risks and revealing new challenges, including peace and security. There are other ongoing parallel initiatives under the UN framework which aim to find a cure against COVID-19 virus and ensure its rapid, fair, and equitable distribution to the global population, to support health systems worldwide, particularly the weaker ones, address the urgent need for medical supplies, diagnostics, and therapeutics in response to the pandemic, and to enhance global solidarity in response to the global crisis. These initiatives are access to COVID-19 tools, ACT Accelerator, which ensures the development of and access to COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, and therapeutics. There is also the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, CTAP, which offers concrete actions to achieve equitable global access to vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics to address the COVID-19 virus by prioritizing information on health technology-related knowledge, intellectual property, and data. The Philippines has also received contributions from other multilateral institutions like the IAEA, which has provided COVID detection equipment, materials, and supplies amounting to approximately 21.4 million pesos. The Philippines is also among the countries that will receive augmentation of medical supplies such as surgical masks. All these examples show how the Philippines has been active in engaging the UN in the last 75 years. It is for this reason that, despite some concerns on human rights, the UN will likely be at the forefront of the Philippines' efforts in multilateral diplomacy for many years to come.